Listen carefully. I am about to shatter every comfortable lie you've been telling yourself about success. You sit there, wallowing in your mediocrity, convinced that your suffering is evidence of your failure. You are wrong. Dead wrong. And your ignorance of this fundamental truth is precisely why you remain trapped in the suffocating cage of your own limitations. I speak to you now with the brutal honesty that weak minds cannot stomach. Your pain is not your problem, it is your price. And if you cannot pay this price, if you shrink from this sacred transaction, then you deserve exactly what you have. Nothing. Welcome to the most uncomfortable hour of your life. Welcome to your financial liberation. And welcome to Timbuktu Lectures, a production of Kilimanjaro News Network, the authentic voice of Africa. We studied the lives of over 25,000 men and women who achieved extraordinary success, and I can tell you this with mathematical certainty. Every single one, from Nelson Mandela to Aliko Dangote, from Mo Ibrahim to Barack Obama, from Lupita Nyong'o to Francis Ngannou, understood that pain is not your problem, it is your price, that taking action is the ultimate killer of fear. This simple idea is the difference between these successful men and women and the masses who live lives of quiet desperation. In this lecture, I will reveal to you 8 immutable laws, each one a key that unlocks a hidden chamber of your own greatness. These laws will prove to you, beyond question, that pain is not punishment, it is preparation. It is the price of admission to your higher self. Every man or woman who ever rose to power, purpose, or prosperity has walked this path. Not one escaped it. Not even Jesus Christ. So I say to you now, listen closely. Take notes if you must. But above all, pay attention. Because what you are about to learn may disturb you, but it will also deliver you. And if you apply it, truly apply it, it will change the entire trajectory of your life. This is not inspiration. This is instruction. The pain you're feeling has a purpose. Let me show you what it is. Are you ready? The first law. No one is coming. No one is coming. Not next week. Not when things finally settle. Not when the stars align or the economy stabilize or you feel ready. If you're waiting for a breakthrough, for a sign, for the right time, you'll be waiting forever. Because life does not reward the man who waits. It answers the one who moves. The lie didn't knock on the door. It didn't shout. It whispered. Through well-meaning voices, teachers, TV anchors, your friends, even your own parents. They told you to wait. To hold on. That someone would show up. That things would work themselves out. But comfort is a slow poison. Because it doesn't sting. It sedates. It rocks you gently into irrelevance. Meanwhile, time does not stop. The days pass. And you remain a container of potential, sealed and still. In every generation, a man appears who refuses to accept the life handed to him. He does not wait for permission. He does not beg for opportunity. He earns his future in blood, sweat, and absolute belief. That man, in our time, was Barack Obama. After September 11, 2001, America descended into fear. Suspicion became the default. Identity became a weapon. Names mattered, and his name was Barack Hussein Obama. In a nation hunting for enemies, he bore a name that sounded like the enemy. Imagine that. He wasn't just campaigning for office, he was campaigning to exist in the public imagination without being seen as a threat. Every word he spoke was weighed, not for wisdom but for warning signs. Every step forward was shadowed by distrust. When he first ran for Congress in 2000, he was humiliated, not narrowly defeated, but obliterated. A crushing loss. The political class laughed him off. He was too green, too soft, too different. He didn't come from money. He didn't come from power. He didn't carry a dynasty name. He was told to sit down. Wait his turn. But here's what separates the ordinary from the exceptional. The great ones do not interpret defeat as rejection. They interpret it as instruction. Obama didn't retreat. He studied the pain. He didn't numb himself to the criticism, he internalized it, turned it into fuel. That crushing debt? That wasn't a burden. It was leverage. The modest apartment, the missed meals, the sleepless nights, those were chapters in a personal gospel of growth. And Michelle, brilliant, formidable Michelle, wasn't just a witness. She was a warrior beside him. She watched him stumble again and again, and still she held the line. Not because she couldn't walk away, but because she saw what many didn't. He wasn't chasing fantasy. He was building capacity. They were under financial strain, yes. But she knew that a man willing to risk comfort for conviction is a man the world cannot ignore for long. Their marriage bore the weight of that ambition. Bills stacked. Jobs were scarce. Promises poured in, paychecks didn't. She had every logical reason to say, enough. Go corporate. Be safe. Be sensible. But logic is the language of mediocrity. Greatness speaks another tongue. Obama understood a core law of achievement. Your moment will never be handed to you. You must seize it, sometimes with bruised hands and blooded knuckles. So when seasoned politicians with inherited legacies and inherited donors said, "Wait your turn," he didn't hear advice. He heard fear. He knew that those who are already in power always ask the rising threat to slow down. Every no became a stepping stone. Every accusation of unelectability became a mirror in which he studied and sharpened himself. He began to understand that pain wasn't punishment. It was preparation. The debt reminded him what real Americans were living with. The rejection reminded him of what every underdog feels. The struggle reminded him who he was fighting for. By the time he reached the White House, he didn't simply arrive. He deserved. He wasn't a man lucky enough to win. He was a man who had already paid in full. The pain was never the price. It was the investment. The second law. Pain is preparation, not punishment. Here is a law written not in ink, but in fire. Pain is the price of transformation. And yet, the masses continue to misread their struggle. They stagger through life cursing their discomfort, mistaking it for injustice. But let us speak with absolute clarity. Pain is not cruelty. It is curriculum. The world is not punishing you. The universe is not conspiring against you. But it is testing you ruthlessly, relentlessly, because it must know whether you are worthy of the power you seek. Most people never rise. Not because they lack talent. Not because they lack opportunity. But because the first time pain taps them on the shoulder, they fold. They interpret suffering as a sign to quit, not a signal to grow. So they retreat into comfort. Into mediocrity. Into the safe, shallow waters where nothing is demanded and nothing is earned. But the titans, the true builders of history, they understand what pain really is, the proving ground of purpose. Welcome to the Mandela University of Suffering. Do not let the polished monuments deceive you. Nelson Mandela's greatness was not born in freedom. It was born in chains. 27 years. That is not a metaphor. That is not a parable. That is reality. 27 years of forced labor, of sleeping on concrete, of being called a number instead of a name. 27 years where his dignity was assaulted, his identity was erased, and the world forgot he even existed. But he did not forget himself. Every day on Robben Island was a brutal reminder of how far a man can fall. But Mandela refused to see it as a descent. He saw it as a discipline. He turned his prison into a monastery. His captors thought they had buried him. But they had planted him. Do you think he did not doubt? He did. Do you think he did not weep? Of course. He was not a statue, he was a man. But he understood this: pain is a teacher, and those who listen carefully become more than men. They become forces of nature. His suffering became his sanctuary. Every insult became a lesson in patience. Every injustice became a lesson in strategy. He studied his enemies. He mastered his own emotions. While the world moved on, he built within himself a character strong enough to hold a fractured nation together. When he emerged, he did not emerge with vengeance, he emerged with vision. And that, more than any policy or speech, is why he endured. Because the pain had purified him. He wasn't just prepared to lead, he was qualified by suffering. The guards who beat him? He forgave them. The system that broke his body? He reformed it. The name that was once dragged through the dirt? It became a crown. And now I ask you, what are you doing with your pain? You complain about a job you chose. You whine about a relationship you tolerated. You blame the world for not rewarding effort you didn't commit to. You flinch at criticism. You rage at discomfort. You seek relief before you've earned reward. Mandela endured 10,000 nights of silence. What have you endured? Do not confuse irritation for injustice. Do not confuse discomfort for cruelty. The universe does not punish the unworthy, it simply ignores them. But those willing to suffer with purpose are the ones who are sculpted for significance. You are not being punished. You are being prepared. The question is, are you listening to the lesson? There's a temptation, especially in the age of headlines and highlight reels, to believe that wealth is inherited, discovered, or manufactured through cleverness alone. That billionaires are minted in boardrooms or born into luck. But look closer. At the core of every lasting empire is something no accountant can calculate: pain endured privately, long before success was ever public. Aliko Dangote didn't appear on the Forbes list by accident. Nor by inheritance. He arrived there through a crucible of trial. Most wouldn't survive, because most wouldn't even enter. Let's rewind. At just 20 years old, he didn't launch with fanfare or family fortune. He borrowed $3,000 from his uncle. Borrowed. That word matters. It carries weight. A gift is generous. A loan is loaded. A loan is an agreement laced with pressure, pride, and the unspoken contract of don't embarrass the family name. He wasn't buying stock. He was buying time, a small window to prove that his ambition wasn't vanity. That he wouldn't be another overconfident heir who mistook access for ability. He could have taken the safe route. Imported rice and sugar, turned a profit, and retired into the folds of the merchant class. But Dangote was not looking to play the game. He was looking to change it. That required steel, both literal and spiritual. He slept in his office, not for efficiency, but because rent was a luxury. He skipped meals, not for health, but because each naira had to stretch across a payroll, a shipment, a promise he made to suppliers who'd stopped believing in promises. The banks rejected him, not once or twice, but again and again. And each time, he didn't just walk away. He studied the refusal. Learned their language. Figured out how to make his business too real, too disciplined, too undeniable to ignore. While others chased investors, he chased indifference and turned it into leverage. He was mocked. Laughed at. Called the cement boy as if dreaming about manufacturing Africa's future infrastructure was somehow beneath the business elite. But while they laughed, he listened. And built. Because here's the truth, pain, over time, becomes perspective. Dangote's sleepless nights taught him not just resilience but sequence, which problem to solve first, which fire could burn while he built the bridge over the next. Currency devaluations wiped out millions. Political instability threatened his plants. Competitors with deeper pockets undercut him at every corner. But you know what happens to a man who's already eaten failure with his fingers? He doesn't panic. He pivots. Because he knows something the comfort-born never learn. You are only as big as the pain you can metabolize. Dangote didn't merely survive the furnace. He chose it. By the time the billions arrived, he didn't flinch. Because they weren't changing him, they were catching up to the man he'd already become. That's the secret. Wealth didn't forge him. Pain did. Today, his cement plants operate across more than 10 African countries. Not because he had more luck, but because he had more wounds, and he turned them into wisdom. Greatness, you see, is forged like steel, heated, hammered, hardened. The third law. Success consciousness. Let's now turn to Mo Ibrahim, the visionary who built where others blinked. You've heard it before, go where the opportunity is. But what they don't tell you is that true opportunity rarely announces itself. It doesn't wear a name tag. It doesn't show up in safe markets or come prepackaged in PowerPoint decks. It looks like chaos. It feels like risk. It arrives dressed in rejection, red tape, and ridicule. And that's why the masses miss it. But Mo Ibrahim didn't. He looked at Africa, a continent dismissed by global investors, smeared by clichés of instability and despair, and saw not a lost cause, but a blank canvas. While others turned away from its lack of infrastructure, he saw something else, potential untouched by convention. And more importantly, he bet everything on it. Not investor money. His own. Every cent he'd saved, every comfort he could have clung to, he cast into a vision so large it bordered on madness. To build a mobile telecommunications network across countries that didn't yet have reliable electricity. Let that sink in. Where most people hesitate over dropped signals, Mo was laying the groundwork in places where governments were falling, currencies collapsing, and trust in institutions was paper thin. No roadmaps. No parachutes. Just the sheer will to create what had never been done. He didn't draw a salary. Not for months. While his peers moved comfortably through corporate routines, Ibrahim was holding his breath every payroll cycle, rationing resources, answering to a family that feared he'd lost his grip on reality. But here's the test of every dream. Can you stay loyal to it in the silence, when there are no guarantees, no applause, no evidence? That's what separates dreamers from builders. Builders don't need proof. They become the proof. He dealt with bureaucrats who moved like molasses and corruption that moved like fire. Officials demanded bribes. He refused. Every no he encountered wasn't a wall, it was a workout. Strengthening the muscles of perseverance. Building the endurance required not just to launch a company, but to change the very infrastructure of how a continent communicates. It wasn't just telecom towers he was erecting, it was a new idea of what Africa could be. And when Keltel was finally sold for $3.4 billion, it wasn't the exit that mattered. It was what that exit meant. Mo hadn't just made money. He'd connected tens of millions of people across over a dozen countries. He had made the invisible visible, the impossible real. And here's the part the comfort seekers never understand. The pain wasn't a tax. It was tuition. It bought him the right to lead. The right to say, I built this. I earned this. I bled for this. He didn't just win a market. He built a standard. Lupita Nyong'o. The sculpting of irreplaceable beauty. Before there is recognition, there is rejection. And for Lupita Nyong'o, rejection came with a venom far more personal than professional. She wasn't told she lacked talent. No, the verdict was crueler, she was told she didn't fit. Too dark to be the romantic lead. Too African to be marketable. Too intelligent to be cast as helpless. Hollywood couldn't find a slot for her, not because she lacked something, but because she embodied too much of what the industry had never been forced to see as valuable. And that is the first pain of the path. You're not rejected because you're wrong. You're rejected because you're new. Her accent, her presence, her skin, all were filtered through centuries of narrow definitions of beauty. And each no she heard wasn't just a declined audition. It was a reminder that an entire system had yet to evolve to the place where someone like her was imaginable, let alone celebrated. Most people would have adapted. Blended in. Smoothed the edges. Taken safer roles. Lowered their voice. Changed their hair. But Lupita didn't negotiate with mediocrity. She chose to wait for the world to catch up. And while she waited, she studied. Relentlessly. Obsessed with craft. Sharpening the instrument of her talent so that when the door finally opened, she wouldn't just walk through it, she would redefine the room. Because here's the truth, being ahead of your time is lonely. Painfully so. But if you endure that isolation long enough, the very thing they rejected you for becomes the thing they build monuments to. When 12 Years a Slave came, it wasn't just a breakout role, it was an unveiling. She didn't act, she channeled. The suffering her character endured on screen was inseparable from the pain she had carried for years off screen. That Oscar? It wasn't a trophy. It was a receipt. Proof that her pain had been preparing her for a moment only she could own. The world didn't give her permission. She claimed it. And the industry? It didn't open its arms. She broke the door off its hinges and redefined what the leading woman could look like. Frances Ngannou, pain, power, and the price of possibility. You think you know what hard work is. Maybe you've pulled late nights, hit the gym, skipped comfort for a cause. Good. But understand this, at 22, Francis Ngannou wasn't lifting weights, he was lifting buckets of sand under the blistering sun of Cameroon. Earning $2 a day, bleeding from his hands, muscles exhausted not from sport, but from survival. That wasn't training. That was initiation. You see, when most people speak of chasing their dreams, they already have passports. Or mentors. Or at least dinner. Ngannou had none of that. What he had was the flicker of a vision, and the audacity to believe that his fists could buy him a future. So he left. With nothing but hope. Crossed borders. Faced arrests. Spent nights in jail. Crossed the Sahara, risked his life on the Mediterranean. Each step toward Europe was another layer of pain, another toll paid in hunger, loneliness, humiliation. He arrived in Paris homeless. Not poetically homeless, literally sleeping in parking garages, showering in gyms that tolerated his presence more than they welcomed it. He trained anyway. In shoes that didn't fit, with trainers who didn't know his name. Because here's what most people don't understand. Dreams don't ask if you're ready. They ask if you're willing. And Ngannou was willing to suffer. Not in the abstract, not symbolically, but in the cold, real way that breaks most men. The kind of suffering that makes you question your sanity, that strips you of pride until all that's left is the decision, quit or keep moving. He kept moving. He fought with borrowed gear. Fought without fanfare. Fought with the knowledge that every punch thrown was really at poverty, at obscurity, at the lie that where you're born is where you must stay. And then, slowly, the tide turned. One victory. Then another. Until one day, Ngannou stepped into the UFC octagon, not as a charity case, but as a contender. His fists carried not just knockout power, but the accumulated rage and resilience of every indignity he had ever endured. When he won the heavyweight championship, it wasn't a Cinderella story. It was a reclamation. A man who had slept in the dirt now stood on top of the world, not because he was lucky, but because he had survived what most never could. That belt? It wasn't leather and gold. It was a receipt, payment for years of invisible labor. And here's the hard truth. The pain wasn't a detour. It was the training ground. The mines had built his body. The hunger had carved his discipline. The homelessness had crystallized his focus. Nothing was wasted. Everything had been invested. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie didn't grow up surrounded by African novels. She grew up reading British boarding school tales and American bestsellers, stories where the rain was always cold, the food was always toast and jam, and nobody ever ate mangoes or lived under corrugated roofs or braided their sister's hair before school. She once said that the first time she read a novel that reflected her life, she realized, people like me can exist in books. Now pause on that. Not people like me can succeed. But something even more fundamental, we can exist. That's the kind of psychological exile most people never even notice. If you grow up always seeing yourself represented, you don't realize the violence of being absent. The quiet erasure. The pain of knowing your world exists, but never seeing it reflected back to you as real, as worthy, as literature. But Adichie didn't let that absence swallow her. She did something few have the courage to do, she sat down and created what she had never seen. She wrote herself into being. She wrote in a voice that was too African for some, too Western for others, too literary for commercial markets, too political for polite fiction. She was told to dilute it, globalize it, make it more relatable. That's code for make it less Nigerian, less African, less female, less you. She refused. Every short story was a declaration of selfhood. Every novel was a rebellion. Purple Hibiscus wasn't just a coming-of-age story, it was a challenge to a publishing world that thought African girls didn't sell. Half of A Yellow Sun was a confrontation with a history many preferred to forget. An Americaner? That was the slap in the face. A novel that dared to explore what it means to be black in America, an African and a woman, all at once. And when the world finally caught on, when the awards came, when Beyoncé quoted her, when Time called her a global thinker, understand this. That recognition wasn't success. It was confirmation. Because long before the applause, Adichie had already paid the price. The pain of erasure. The pain of being misunderstood. The pain of writing stories no one wanted to buy yet. She didn't write for comfort. She wrote to become. You starting to see the pattern? Francis Ngannou fought to exist in a ring. Chimamanda wrote to exist on a page. Lupita acted to exist on a screen. Mo Ibrahim built to exist in an economy that had written him off. And all of them, all, transformed their pain into power by doing the hardest thing there is. They refused to let the world define them before they could define themselves. They didn't wait for permission. They didn't apologize for ambition. They didn't soften their truth to fit someone else's comfort zone. They burned through it all and emerged as creators of new realities. Imagine your existence being illegal. Not your actions. Not your choices. Your very being. That's Trevor Noah's beginning. Apartheid South Africa. 1984, his mother, a black Xhosa woman. His father, a white Swiss German. Their relationship? Forbidden. His birth? A quiet act of rebellion. His life? Evidence of a crime. From day one, he wasn't supposed to be seen. He writes about how his mother would sometimes pretend he wasn't hers in public, how they'd walk on opposite sides of the street, him with a colored nanny, just so they wouldn't draw attention. That's not just parenting under pressure. That's guerrilla motherhood. He lived between languages. Between skin tones. Between townships and suburbs. He wasn't black enough. He wasn't white. He wasn't colored in the South African sense. So he became what the system couldn't classify, adaptable. And that right there, adaptability, became his superpower. But make no mistake. It was born in pain. He wasn't joking for fun. He was joking to survive. Joke to diffuse tension. Joke to distract bullies. Joke to avoid a beating. Joke to fit into a world that didn't know where to place him. His first language? Mimicry. His comedy didn't come from privilege. It came from the pressure cooker of poverty, identity confusion, and state-sponsored paranoia. And underneath it all, his mother. Patricia Nombayizelo Noah. A woman who defied the regime, who dragged her son to 3 different churches every Sunday, who taught him to speak multiple languages, who risked everything to give him a different mental framework. Not just to survive, but to understand the madness of the world and still choose to be joyful in it. When Trevor talks about being thrown out of a moving car by gangsters, or getting shot at, or seeing his stepfather abuse his mother, or being arrested for driving a stolen car, that wasn't stolen but couldn't be proven because it was under an illegal name, this isn't comic material. This is trauma repurposed. And yet, he never collapsed. He never submitted. He studied the world that tried to erase him. He studied it so hard he could imitate it, expose it, and make it laugh at itself. That's what comedy is at its highest form, a scalpel disguised as laughter. Trevor's rise wasn't a Cinderella story. It was a high-wire act, moving between worlds, learning their codes, mastering their rhythms. From South African stand-up clubs to international stages. From a boy who wasn't supposed to exist to a man explaining American racism to Americans with more clarity than they've ever heard it. And by the time he took over The Daily Show, a role many thought he was unqualified for, he wasn't stepping into a spotlight. He was claiming what the pain had trained him for. Because when you've had to explain yourself your whole life, when your body was a political statement, when your laughter was a defense mechanism and your truth was always half swallowed to stay safe, you don't crumble under pressure. You rise. And this is what the third law is all about. Success consciousness demands painful awareness. Trevor became success conscious not through self-help books or perfect circumstances, but through survival. Through watching the cracks in every system and realizing that to truly succeed, he had to become unclassifiable, uncancelable, unshakable, fluent in contradiction. He didn't just survive apartheid. He reverse-engineered it. We can keep going. There's a map forming here. Each person, Mandela, Obama, Dangote, Ngannou, Chimamanda, Lupita, Ibrahim, Noah, they've each paid in pain, but what they bought was their own voice. This is the kind of material that makes steel out of sentences. Let's move to the fourth law. Character is revealed, not created, by adversity. Here's the truth most people don't want to hear, let alone live. Pain doesn't build character, it exposes it. You don't become a different person in the fire. You become more of who you already are. And if there's nothing solid beneath the surface, the fire doesn't forge, you just burn. Success? It's not fair. It's not evenly distributed. It doesn't follow merit or morality. But suffering? Suffering is democratic. It visits everyone. The only difference between those who rise and those who don't is what they do when it knocks. Most people break. Some people break open. Wangari Maathai didn't just plant trees. She planted defiance. The global story softens her legacy. African woman wins Nobel Peace Prize for planting trees. But that headline hides the war. What she really did was challenge a political and economic system designed to crush the earth for profit, and dared to do it as a woman, an academic, a divorced mother. In Kenya, in the 70s and 80s, that combination made her a walking provocation. She was beaten in the streets, laughed out of courtrooms, thrown in jail and locked up with violent criminals who looked at her not as a hero but as a rich nuisance. Her husband left her, claiming she was too assertive and headstrong. The state branded her a traitor. Western environmental groups patronized her. And yet, she kept planting. The pain wasn't a detour. It was a diagnosis. Because she learned, conviction without consequence is just an opinion. The jail cells validated her mission. The beatings verified her threat to the status quo. The solitude revealed her clarity. So when she reached 30 million trees, when women across Kenya became entrepreneurs instead of victims, when the world finally handed her that Nobel medal, it wasn't despite the pain. It was because of it. The scars had paid for the soil. The pain had bought her place in the story. The fifth law. Transformation requires death. Make no mistake, something in you must die before something greater can be born. You cannot become the person your destiny demands while clinging to the habits, beliefs, and fears that built your current limitations. The man who seeks transformation must be willing to bury the man he used to be. This is not metaphor. This is law. The old self must go. The excuses, the self-pity, the need for validation, they are dead weight. And as long as you carry them, you delay your evolution. Every breakthrough begins with a burial. Burn the bridge to who you were. Set fire to the story that has kept you small. And step forward, wounded, uncertain, maybe even afraid, but free. This is the cost of transformation, the death of comfort, the death of ego, the death of who you no longer need to be. Pay it. And rise. Meet Yvonne Chaka Chaka when the stage became a battlefield. Yvonne Chaka Chaka didn't just sing through apartheid, she sang into it. Not around it, not above it. straight into the heart of a system built to silence people like her. She was called the Princess of Africa, but there was nothing delicate about her path. Growing up in a country where skin color could get you killed or erased, she didn't run from that reality. She carried it unstage. And she did the one thing forbidden to black South Africans at the time: she thrived, publicly. That made her dangerous. Every song she sang while her people were brutalized felt like a gamble. Was she soothing wounds, or surviving by singing over them? Was success a victory, or a kind of betrayal? She lived with that tension. She didn't escape it through glitter and rhythm, she held it in every note. There was pressure, immense pressure, to shut up and smile. To keep it light. To stay grateful. Record labels urged her to avoid politics. International agents pulled deals when she wouldn't play safe. Threats came. Not always direct, but unmistakable. Her refusal to flinch, to dilute her truth for comfort or currency, was itself an act of resistance. Because Chaka Chaka understood something most artists never learn. Real music doesn't just chart, it challenges. It disturbs. It survives. She wasn't just making pop hits. She was singing with landmines under her feet. Her pain, the fear, the guilt, the isolation, wasn't a detour. It was the crucible. It turned her into more than a performer. It made her a cultural insurgent. A black woman with a microphone in a system built on her silence. Her songs didn't just move bodies. They moved borders. That was the legacy. And it was bought, not with comfort, but with nerve, grief, and grit. Furla Ransom Kuti didn't just play music, he made it a weapon pointed straight at the throat of tyranny. Not some polite nod or half-hearted complaint, but a full-throated roar that shook the ground beneath a corrupt, brutal system. They called him a rebel, a madman, a prophet, but beneath all that was a man who refused to be erased. In a world where speaking truth to power meant risking your life, Furla stepped into the arena with nothing but his saxophone and a fury that wouldn't quit. He wasn't just a musician. He was a storm. The kind that breaks the silence of fear and rips open the wounds that others try to hide. Every note, every beat was a declaration: I will not be silent. I will not be tamed. They wanted him quiet: labels, governments, armies of silence. They wanted him to sell sugar-coated stories, to entertain without challenging the throne. But Furla Kuti? He laughed at their offers. His music wasn't for comfort, it was for confrontation. Threats came like shadows, lurking, relentless. Prisons, beatings, exile, they tried to bury him. But Furla's voice only grew louder, fiercer, unbreakable. Because he understood what so many don't: real art doesn't just entertain. It disturbs, it disrupts, it demands change. His music was landmines planted in the streets of oppression. You couldn't walk past it without feeling the tremors. Pain, fear, rage, they weren't distractions or setbacks. They were the fuel. The fire that forged him into more than a musician, a revolutionary with a horn. An Abiyokuta man challenging a world built to silence him. Furla didn't just move crowds. He moved minds. Borders, systems, and hearts. He tore down walls with sound. That's the legacy. Not comfort, not easy applause. But guts. Grief. An unyielding grit. Today, Nigerian politics and Afrobeats music has Furla to thank. He placed it on the map. Because he did not do what was easy but what was hard. Welcome to the sixth law. Drift is death with good intentions. Drift is the enemy. Not failure. Not rejection. Not even fear. Drift. That quiet slide away from your purpose. That soft voice that says, not yet. Think it through. Wait until it makes sense. You don't fall off track in a single moment. You drift. A week goes by. Then a month. Then a year. You still say you're figuring it out. But what you're doing is stalling. Dangote didn't wait for the market to roll out a red carpet. When he saw opportunity in cement, he didn't commission studies or wait for government approval. He moved, built, learned on the way. The pain of making mistakes in real time was far less than the pain of perfect plans that never launched. Mo Ibrahim didn't wait for continent-wide approval for mobile infrastructure. He saw opportunity, acted, and figured out the regulatory landscape as he built it. The pain of pioneering was his investment in first-mover advantage. Tony Elumelu didn't wait for certainty before launching his philosophy of Afrocapitalism. He acted on conviction and corrected course along the path. The pain of being wrong occasionally was far less than the pain of being irrelevant permanently. Obama didn't wait for America to be ready for him. When advisors told him 2008 wasn't his time, that he should wait for 2016 or beyond, he understood something they didn't. Readiness is not a prerequisite for greatness, it's a consequence of it. He ran not because the conditions were perfect, but because he understood that perfect conditions are the enemy of perfect timing. The pain of running before he was ready was his qualification for leadership when America needed it most. That's how the greats operate. They act first. Then they adapt. Clarity is not found in stillness. Clarity is earned through momentum. You don't think your way into confidence. You act your way into it. The seventh law. Fear dies in movement. Action is the antidote to fear. Not confidence. Not perfection. Action. Fear hates movement. It can only survive in stillness. It feeds off hesitation. But the moment you act, even clumsily, it starts to die. Genevieve Nnaji. The actress who wouldn't stay in her lane. Genevieve Nnaji didn't have to fight. She was already crowned, Nigeria's darling, the face of Nollywood, a legend in her own right. She could have kept cashing in, smiling for the cameras, playing it safe in recycled scripts and predictable roles. But comfort, to her, felt like a slow death. She saw something bigger. Not just for herself, but for Nollywood, for African storytelling. And she knew it wouldn't come gently. So she stepped off the pedestal and walked straight into the storm. Rejection from international festivals. Critics at home calling her a traitor to tradition. Investors who didn't get the vision. She faced all of it. Not because she liked the pain, but because she believed it was the price of real change. She bet on something no one could guarantee, that African cinema belonged on the world stage. Lionheart wasn't just a film, it was a gauntlet thrown down. The first Nigerian entry to the Academy Awards. A message to the world, we're not waiting for permission. She stopped being just a performer. She became an architect of the future. And that's the difference. Fear says, stay where it's safe. Action says, build where it hurts. She chose motion. She chose risk. And in doing so, she didn't just change her career, she cracked open a door for an entire continent. Bethlehem Tilahan Olomu, the Ethiopian entrepreneur who didn't grow up with privilege. She didn't even grow up with shoes. Dirt roads. Bare feet. Poverty so loud it echoed. She could have stayed in that story. Plenty do. But she didn't. She took that pain and turned it into product. Soul Rebels wasn't born from a boardroom, it was born from barefoot mornings, from a hunger that wouldn't die quietly. She wasn't supposed to win. No business degree. No legacy brand. No global network. Just vision, and the kind of courage that doesn't flinch. Learning supply chains. Pitching to people who saw Made in Africa as second-rate. Competing with giants who'd been in the game since before she was born. That wasn't just hard, it was brutal. But here's the thing, she knew fear only survives when you stand still. So she moved. And kept moving. When Soul Rebels opened a store in Silicon Valley, yes, the same Silicon Valley that didn't see Africa coming, when celebrities laced up her shoes, when she flipped the narrative on what African entrepreneurship could be. She wasn't just selling shoes. She was walking over every lie she'd been told about who she was and what she was allowed to build. Pain was the toll. Progress was the road. She paid in full. That's the real story. Not the headlines. Not the highlight reel. But the movement. The risk. The refusal to stall. Because greatness isn't a prize handed out for playing it safe. It's the reward for walking into the fire and staying long enough to build something that lasts. The 8th law. Your pain is targeted preparation. Here's the ultimate uncomfortable truth: your pain is not random. It's not punishment from an angry universe. It's not evidence of your unworthiness. Your pain is targeted. It's designed to prepare you for a specific purpose that only you can fulfill. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala faced the unique pain of being constantly underestimated, too African for global finance, too female for traditional leadership, too educated for populist politics. Every barrier she broke required enduring the discomfort of being first, of being different, of being watched for evidence of failure. As Nigeria's finance minister, she endured death threats for fighting corruption. As a World Bank executive, she navigated institutional racism disguised as professional skepticism. As the first African Director General of the World Trade Organization, she faced questions about her qualifications that her predecessors never encountered. But the pain was preparation. Every slight was training in diplomacy. Every barrier was education in persistence. Every moment of being underestimated was qualification for representing voices that had never been heard at the highest levels of global governance. When she finally reached the pinnacle of international trade leadership, the pain hadn't been her obstacle, it had been her curriculum. Your moment of truth. So here you are, at the crossroads where comfortable lies meet uncomfortable truths. You can close this lecture, return to your social media feed, and continue living the safe, predictable, utterly forgettable life that requires no pain and produces no greatness. Or you can choose differently. You can choose to see your current pain not as evidence of your failure but as evidence of your potential. You can choose to understand that the very thing that's breaking you is actually making you. You can choose to embrace the uncomfortable truth that your pain is not your enemy, it's your price. But understand this: the choice is yours, but the consequences are permanent. Every moment you spend in comfortable mediocrity is a moment stolen from your potential greatness. Every day you choose the easy path is a day you train yourself to be ordinary. Here is a summary of the 8 laws we have discussed in this lecture. 1. No one is coming, your salvation depends entirely on your action. 2. Pain is preparation, every struggle is qualification for your destiny. 3. Success consciousness, you must become success before you achieve it. 4. Character is revealed, adversity exposes who you really are. 5. Transformation requires death, the old you must die for the new you to be born. 6. Drift is death, comfortable inaction kills more dreams than failure. 7. Fear dies in movement, action is the only antidote to paralysis. 8. Pain is targeted, your specific struggles prepare you for your specific purpose. The legends whose stories I've shared, Mandela, Obama, Dangote, Lupita, Ngannou, Ibrahim, Maathai, Adichie, Chaka Chaka, Naji, Fela Kuti, Olamu, Okonjo-Iweala, they are not different from you. They felt the same pain, faced the same doubts, experienced the same moments of wanting to quit. The only difference is that they understood what you're learning now. Pain is not the end of your story, it's the beginning of your legend. Now the question is, what will you do with this uncomfortable truth? Will you use it as fuel for your transformation, or will you file it away with all the other inspirational content you've consumed but never applied? The choice is yours. The pain is certain. The greatness is waiting. Choose wisely. Choose now. Choose to pay the price. Because your pain is not your punishment, it's your promise. Remember, every breakdown is actually a breakthrough in disguise. Every moment of despair is actually a moment of preparation. Every time you think you can't go on is actually the moment when your true strength begins to emerge. The pain is not the problem, your resistance to it is. When you embrace it, when you understand its purpose, when you see it as your teacher, that's when transformation begins. Your legend starts now. Your pain is your price. Pay it willingly and claim your greatness.
Congratulations. And now we stand at the edge of this moment. The lecture is done, the truths have been laid bare, and all that remains is your response. Not your applause. Not your agreement. Your action. Because nothing you've just heard will matter if it remains trapped in your notes, buried under your comfort, or suffocated by the old story you keep telling yourself about why now's not the time. Let me be painfully clear. Now is the only time you will ever have. You don't become who you're meant to be someday. You become it today by doing the hard, thankless, invisible work of killing who you were, and choosing, every hour, to step into who you must become. You've just encountered 8 laws. Not ideas. Not suggestions. Laws. The people who shaped this continent's history lived by them. They paid for their greatness with scars. With rejection. With failure. With public humiliation. With long, lonely seasons where no one clapped, no one saw, and no one believed but them. Mandela gave up 27 years. Fela Kuti gave up safety. Genevieve gave up predictability. Olumu gave up excuses. Obama gave up permission. Dangote gave up overthinking. And now it's your turn. You don't need anyone's validation. You don't need another year of planning, another motivational podcast, another affirmation written on your mirror. You need brutal honesty and violent clarity that the life you're capable of is being held hostage by the life you're too afraid to let go of. You were not born to spectate history. You were born to shape it. Africa does not need more opinions. It needs builders. Doors. Lions with bruises. Architects of the unseen. Men and women with enough fire in their chest to build what has never been built, speak what has never been said, and live how others are too afraid to try. And understand this, you will pay a price. Every dream does. The only question is whether you will pay the price of discipline, courage, and action, or the price of regret, resentment, and watching others become what you were capable of all along. There are people, future teammates, future customers, future children waiting on your transformation. You are the delay, and you are the answer. So choose. Right now. Choose to become the kind of person who doesn't just consume content, but becomes the content others talk about when they speak of African greatness. Choose to be a storm, not a slogan. A standard, not a spectator. Because if Africa is still crawling, it's not for lack of potential. It's because too many of its giants are still sleeping. Wake up. Stand up. Build what only you can build. Let your pain make sense by letting it produce fruit. Let your doubt be silenced by evidence. Let your life, this one, precious life, become the proof that greatness still walks among us. The continent is watching. Your legend starts now. Your pain is your price. Pay it. And lead. Timbuktu Lectures is a production of Kilimanjaro News Network, the authentic voice of Africa. Broadcasting in Swahili, Arabic, Hausa, English, and French. Don't forget to like, share and scan our QR code to access our YouTube channel and website.